name is James Hill. I'm 40 years old. I'm a British photographer. And the exhibit that is in the Couvent des Minimes is called Somewhere Between War and Peace. And it's a title which, well, Jean-François asked me, in fact, to choose a title for the work. And it's something that reflects, in a way, the mixture of assignments I've done in the last 10, 12 years, which have been, on one hand, assignments that have been in Iraq, Afghanistan, Chechnya, Yugoslavia, Africa, on front lines, and then also another side of sort of feature photography as well. So, in a way, something that's, well, I think for a lot of photojournalists, there's some photographers who dedicate themselves to doing frontline photography, and even though some people might call me a war photographer, I probably wouldn't call myself a war photographer. I mean, I do that, but I've also done a lot of other things. And so what I was trying to show in this exhibit was that part of my work, as well as something that is, that shows the mixed type of work that any photojournalist does in his career. War photographers gives the sense that that's all the person can do. Is not someone who can expand into doing other kinds of photography. And I certainly wouldn't describe myself as someone addicted to war photography, though at the same time I will admit that when you do it, it is something which is a very powerful magnet. Strange enough, I was the first person to do a web journal for the New York Times. I did it in 2000, and in fact it shows how much things have changed, because at the time the New York Times had to hire an outside agency to make the web journal because they didn't have the capability to do that, and it cost $5,000 to make it. Whereas now, of course, these things are turned over in a matter of days within the paper, or I think for whatever magazine you might be working for. I mean, whatever work you do, you can't escape the fact that it's very personal, even if it's work which you try to keep as an independent-minded, open, fair, and politically correct. At the same time, if you have 15 photographers and one event, everyone has a different picture. So by the very nature of it, photography is something which is very personal. And I think that what I've enjoyed a lot, actually, with doing the web journals, is that it's an extra way of adding something to the pictures. I mean, I don't think that at all that the word's detriment. In fact, I think it's very important to try and give some context, to draw in the viewer and into looking a little bit harder at the pictures, just because they feel some kind of association with the photographer. I always admired Cartier-Bresson, for many reasons, but what I liked about his work in particular is what he described in the books, what he described in also some of the films that he made, which is just his words round out the images. It gives a certain personality to the pictures. You go on an assignment for a newspaper, quite often you go someplace, you do a big feature story, it takes 2 weeks, and they publish 3 pictures. Well, hopefully you have more than 3 good pictures from 2 weeks of work. So, in a way, the vastness of the web is, in a way, its great advantage, because you can show 15, 20 pictures if you have that many. And so it just gives a much richer appreciation of the work that you do. Often, there are a lot of photographers, photographers, of course, are complainers by nature, but, you open up the magazine, you say, oh, I don't know why they use this picture, that's not the right picture, and, so there's always that sort of grumpiness that photographers inherently have with editors' choices. Whereas when you have a web presentation, because of the number of pictures that can be put into it, somehow it has a richer tone to it, which I think in a way is more satisfying for a lot of photographers. I think there's a lot of pressure on news publications, upon content publications, if you like, from the outside, because of the blogging revolution, because everybody out there is judging you, whether they have the right to judge you or not, or the credentials to judge you. Even if they have the right to judge you, it puts a lot of pressure on people. And I think that newspapers or television stations often regard as having a political position, even if they really don't. It's in the minds of people they often do. I have been in situations such, for instance, on the way to Baghdad in 2003, I was with the US Marines, and that was an invasion that I utterly disagreed with, and yet I was with people that, were taking part in this, were doing this very thing. And yet at the same time, there were people who were protecting me, feeding me, giving me water, keeping me alive. And I actually had to really make a mental check to stop any cynicism coming into my work, because I had distinctive feelings about the whole event, and at the same time I had to portray that in an independent way. But I think that people are always trying to see if you have a point of view or not. I mean, I really try to maintain I think you can't avoid to have your own personal feelings, but at the same time I think you absolutely have to maintain a sort of a central line and view it as you think it should be viewed in a larger context. In every picture, you should try. There's a detail involved in it, and beyond the detail, there's something that's much larger. I mean, I like pictures to say a lot. I mean, if I often fail, in fact I usually do. Every now and again you succeed in making something which speaks something that's wider and louder. And I'm always trying very hard in the pictures. I mean, and I get very frustrated because I feel like I take a lot of bad pictures, and then there's the ones that work, and you feel quite happy that they do. But I mean, everyone has a very different style of working. I mean, I wouldn't say I'm obsessed by the aesthetics of a photograph, but I feel that you have to really use every corner of space that you have in a picture. You have to somehow, I remember from taking my portfolios to editors would sit there and they go, because they had sort of visual overload. They've been so saturated with images in their life that it's like this, the way they look at a picture. And so I've always felt from that you have to somehow make people work harder when they're looking at the images. And so if you make it harder, you have to do that in a certain way. You have to tease, you have to make something a little more mysterious, you have to ask questions. I don't think there are any answers in the pictures, and I don't pretend to have answers. I mean, you have some photographers who really feel that the work they have is offering an answer to something, and I don't feel that anything I've done is done anything but ask questions or just reported something. But at the same time, I like to try and ask a question. I mean, as much of myself as I do of the people who are looking. I think of the French word exigeante. I feel like it's very important that the image is that. I mean, it's asking a lot, and to do that you have to raise the level. But the level has to be something raised in terms of content, in terms of the news content, and also something in the aesthetic content. I mean, for instance, one of the pictures from the Beslan series, the Visa d'Or last year, is the picture of the cigarettes on the chair, yeah. Which is, I mean, it's rather, if you didn't have the caption below, you'd really have no idea what this picture was saying. And what it was is that people in that room had been basically were men who were in the school who were taken by the terrorists and shot and thrown out the window. They were just cold-bloodedly executed for being men, because they might cause a problem for them. And when people came around the school afterwards, they lit cigarettes and left it on the chair as a mark of respect. And it's nothing I'd ever seen anywhere else. And that I was completely fascinated by. And so I took a picture of it, but by itself it's like a piece of art installation. But at the same time, for me, it has a very important news value, because it's what happened is that it was an act of such horror, and I think people had a very hard time expressing themselves. I mean, people obviously have a natural reaction to that, and it's very hard to express it, especially with words or with jests or with sometimes there's something you might leave, flowers or icons. And so this was something which was very simple at the same time for some of the men who came. It was like a way of saying, trying to connect and just saying something in reaction to the tragedy. But yet in itself, if you just took that picture without a caption or without the other images, it'd be hard to say what it was. But at the same time, even in the set, it had something mysterious in it. It's puzzling, and and that's in fact why I think those pictures had some success. Is that the pictures taken the day of the tragedy. They're very brutal, they're very violent, and they're very very moving. But at the same time, they don't. It's all there in front of you. Whereas these pictures, you have to sort of digest them. You have to take them away with you a little bit and let them percolate. And I think that's why those pictures had a resonance with people, simply because you have to do some of the work. It asked the viewer to make the connection, to try to understand what it was about. And that's what I often try to do. I mean, sometimes often you don't succeed, but I think it's one of the aims that I have as a photographer, is to somehow leave something, to leave a question in it, to leave something mysterious for the viewer to try and work out for themselves, to try and place themselves in that situation. I remember walking through Beslan and I would just start crying because the overwhelming distress was so strong. I mean, no one was saying anything. It was like the silence was screaming, which is, I know, a strange term. It's like you could, and when you walked through the school, you could see the wall. You really felt the walls talking to you. And I had a very hard time. I mean, working there, in fact. And there, it really felt like something particular in the world had been lost. There was some sort of violation, which was just so far beyond the other side of the line that you felt like a little bit of the world, some small innocence in the world had been lost that day. And on one hand, it gave a real power to the images because I was very emotionally charged. But I'm not actually sure to what extent that is a good thing or not. I think that, it's a very fine line as to where that barrier exists between you and what you see, and, the way in which you filter or you don't filter the emotion that's in front of you. I mean, for instance, I spent 3.5 months in Afghanistan, and what amazed me about the Afghans was that on one hand, it's very gentle, kind, generous people, and at the same time, they're surrounded by a really astonishing level of violence on a daily basis. And so the hardened way in which they look at it, it's like, oh yeah, there's another dead body right there. It's like, the way sort of, you might say, oh, there's a nice flower, It was really astonishing to me. And at the beginning, I found it deeply shocking, in fact. But after a while, you just realize it's their own protection against, not getting completely sort of, losing their minds with it. And so by the time I got out of Afghanistan, I mean, I was really a very cold-hearted person. It wasn't like I wanted to become that person. It was just like you end up being like it's like osmosis. You start absorbing the influences around you. And, I didn't recognize myself when I came out. And my girlfriend, who was 4 months pregnant at the time, really didn't recognize me. And in fact, it was very hard. And, you have a hard time adjusting, to sort of the real world after you're in a place like that. The problem is that people are very overloaded with images now. I think that we're sort of absolutely deluged. I mean, it's like you feel like there's a sea and the level of the sea is rising all the time. And I think it's very hard for a sort of a voice, a photographic voice, to be heard amongst all of that. And I think, even if you have to come to Perpignan to see how many photojournalists there are out there. I mean, there are thousands of us, Not only that, I mean, there's when you compare to how many photographers are working, say, 40 years ago, there's far fewer. And so the individual voice there was much stronger. I mean, if you think of the people who covered Vietnam or something, which was a very long war, there really may be 15 photographers who, you would name 20 perhaps. Which for a war that long, it's really not a very big number. Whereas if you had to talk about how many photographers were covering Iraq or Afghanistan or Lebanon or whatever, the number is very long. I mean, you could do it well. And in a way, because it's so hard to sort of individual people to have a voice, I think individual photographers have a voice. I think in a way it's almost a problem because in a way photojournalism is now something, because digital age is open to everybody. On one hand, digital has been a huge boost to photojournalism. I mean, it's made actuality, you can be in the middle of nowhere and absolutely operational, in the middle of Afghanistan or Iraq, wherever, and you've got your digital camera, your generator or your car and your satellite modem, and you take a picture and 20 minutes later it can be in New York. I mean, it's incredible. It's an incredible thing. I mean, now there's sort of like, finding somebody going to the airport to find someone to get on the plane to Paris, who's then going to find someone to go to New York. I mean, it's also changed. I think it's made photojournalism much, much stronger than it was. I think it's made it much more immediate, whereas television had really sort of, I felt, slightly usurped. When you're shooting digital, it's like water. You press the button, and in fact, I often feel that I'm very. I shoot far too much when I shoot digital, and I shoot. I mean, and the worst thing is you edit, and then you go through the edits, that day, and you think, God Almighty, the amount of absolute crap that you shoot just because you could, and it didn't matter because you got a 4 gigabyte card in your camera, so it doesn't matter if you can shoot 1,000 frames. It's not a problem. It's a disease actually, almost. So it's like a terrible temptation that you can't resist. I think with real cameras, with film cameras, there's something that's more measured. I think that when a film finishes after 12 frames, 36 frames, there's an instinctive, and I still shoot a lot of 2.25 film. You work a little bit harder on each frame. I've been living on and off in the former Soviet Union for a long time. I lived in Kiev when it was the Soviet Union, and then I lived in Russia, in Moscow, and I went to live in Italy, and then I came back to Russia. When I left university, and then after that photojournalism college, I studied history at university, and to me the major movement at the time was the end of communism. And I sort of missed the fall in sort of Central Eastern Europe, and so the only place left was the Soviet Union. And I had a friend of mine who was working for the London Times in Kiev, and he very unwisely offered me a bed to stay in for free. And photographers not offer the free bed to be somewhere. So I went off, and I thought it would last 3 months, and we lived like rats. I can safely say we lived like rats. It was sort of vodka, cigarettes, potatoes, and salted cucumbers for weeks on end. But fortunately, he was also a Brit, this friend of mine, so that didn't seem to bother us too much. And it went on from there. And at the time, it was really a society, an enormous change. Like you feel like it changed almost seemed on a daily basis. And that was a very fertile environment to be working in. And the thing was, there weren't many people working there either, so you could afford to be bad, which was a great stroke of luck, because I was pretty bad at the beginning. And in fact, when I go through my old contact sheets, it's so frustrating, because you see these situations which really there were some good pictures to be made, but I just didn't have the visual tools to make them. It's like it's there, it's right in front of you, but somehow you're not able to make the right angle on it. There's just this lack of sophistication in the images. It's just not very aesthetic. It's too simple. It's people in the middle. There's nobody. It just lacks the symmetry to make something just a little bit more sophisticated, more mysterious. I mean, I speak Russian, so that helps me a lot. And also, the Russian press is very invasive. It's a bit like the British press. There's always somebody poking their camera in somebody's face. So in a way, they're actually very used to this invasion. Because a lot of other Western societies, people treat their privacy, or the idea of common privacy, as being very important. In Russia, I think people have had that abused a lot, and so they kind of got used to the idea that it's perfectly okay for you to take pictures, in the banya or wherever. And I mean, I went off taking pictures in Russia a bit just because I got too close to the story. I think when you live a long time in the country, you start to get visually bored. Your eyes have seen the same thing too many times and stop finding it interesting. But because I spent a lot of time away in the last 4 or 5 years, most in the Middle East, I've come back a little bit more hungry for what I'm seeing. And also because I see how in fact the environment has really changed around me, and like something is disappearing in front of my eyes. And so the Moscow that I'm living in now it feels like, so what I'm concentrating on in work terms is the last moments of the Soviet Union. For instance, a few months ago I photographed women veterans in Gorky Park on Victory Day, which is the 9th of May. Most of them are 80, 82. I said this is like, some endangered species which is about to become extinct, because when you go around Moscow, although there are sort of Soviet themes that still exist, they feel a bit kitschy. It's like people have turned them into sort of something like into art or like a joke. And yet there are still people that believed in this story. And I'm not saying that it was right or wrong, but they exist, and in a way that's what seems to be disappearing in front of my eyes. So that's in fact what I'm working on a lot at the moment, is sort of the dying embers of the Soviet Union. Well, for me, photojournalism is a way of expressing. It's a way of expressing a vision, and it's a different medium. And I think that the medium of photography itself has to be appreciated for what exactly it offers. It offers something which a mind can retain. If you ask someone to think of the Vietnam War, they're not thinking of a movie reel. They're thinking of an image in particular. They'll be thinking of Nick Wood's napalm picture. They're thinking of Eddie Adams and the Tet Offensive. The power of photojournalism is it manages to put an image into somebody's head and to make it stay there. And I think, if you ask me what I try to do in my work, it's exactly that. It's to make images. I mean, I don't think, sadly, I'll ever take a picture which will change anything. And I think you're misguided to believe that you ever will. I mean, only luck and mixed with talent can make that happen. But at the same time, I think on a daily basis, you have to believe that there's something of quality inherent in photojournalism, in making an image which means something or asks something or makes somebody who looks at it think twice, and something which you're proud of in itself. I think that's what photojournalism should stand for. I mean, I think that I don't think that it's something that necessarily will, sadly, change the world or save the world. I think in a few occasions it can influence things, but I think the thing is, constantly we should all be asking questions of ourselves and questions of society, and I think that's what the power of an image should be doing.